Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into this afternoon edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So in this afternoon edition of Locked On Capitals, it is game day as the Capitals prepare to take on the Utah Mammoth. And it's one of those games that on paper, or just kind of if you're a casual fan, you're like, yep, it's just another game. But what do you know? What do we know is that the trade deadline is on Friday. And, not the flurry of activity that we have seen in previous seasons. Oftentimes, by the time you make it to the trade deadline, the big deals have already been done. Not the case. At least as I record this at 12:05 p.m. But the Capitals are in an interesting position. A lot of people believe that, Chris Patrick and the Capitals organization, at least part of their decision-making process will be determined on what happens with the Capitals tonight. If they win, maybe they're all in. If they lose, maybe it is time to sell off. So let's dive into that. But first, before we get into that, talking about what we saw, notes from practice, that kind of thing, because the Caps are feeling John Carlson's absence more than they want to admit it, because John Carlson, he will be out again tonight. And we know that we saw him in a no-contact jersey at practice, albeit in practice is a step forward. A no-contact jersey indicates that there is some time, as he will not be in the game tonight. And one of the things that has me a bit concerned, I guess, is that, this was an optional skate today. This group understands the gravity of the situation, that, this team is on the outside looking in. You'd think it would be all hands on deck. And we want to get this game right. We want to crush the Mammoth tonight. And sparsely attended, I guess, a bit surprising. And maybe you should take the title off of optional skate. Unless you're dinged up, you need a little bit of rest. These practices should be all hands on deck. Again, this game has a lot of significance. And you're already out number 74. And day-to-day sounds fine. It sounds manageable. It sounds like, he'll be back soon. But right now, it's not fine, because this team already struggles to generate clean offense. And Spencer Carbery confirmed Carlson won't play tonight against the Mammoth, called their young Arsenal, quote, a handful, unquote. And he's not wrong. Utah is fast. They pressure. They attack in waves. And when Carlson isn't in the lineup, the blue line loses their best puck mover, their most confident zone exit guy, and their quarterback presence. Now, there are quite a few Capitals fans that I hear from on a regular basis saying that take John Carlson, take Alex Ovechkin, these kind of guys off the power play, that kind of thing. But John Carlson is still a big part of this team. And like I say, good puck mover, confident zone exit guy, and quarterback presence. And that matters, especially when the power play is already near the bottom of the league. And Carbery recently backed assistant coach Kirk Muller, despite the power play falling to second last in the NHL. That tells you something. The coaching staff believes their system works, of course. I don't think we're at the point of the season where we can make big changes. Obviously, I would not be surprised if a change is made in the offseason. As far as Kirk Muller is concerned, I mean, it's nothing new, right, Caps fans? We have seen this the entire season. We have seen this for seasons, plural, that the power play is horrible. And, it's one of the things that Carb said earlier before. I'm not going to go, remember this was a month or so ago. I'm not going to change the power play too much. I'm not going to make any big changes. Okay, how has that gone for you? It has not gone too well, but The execution without Carlson, it tightens up. Dylan McElrath draws in for Declan Chisholm. You got the muscle out there, right? That's what you have in Declan Chisholm, in Dylan McElrath. And by his own admission in the Capitals, he's not the fleetest of foot. He's not a great skater, but he is that muscle. So that's not a slight. McElrath brings edge, physicality, and straight line speed. Straight lines. But he's not Carlson. And when you're 6 points back of the Islanders last checked in the Metro and 2 behind the Bruins for a wild card spot, margins matter. Good news, of course, Logan Thompson starts, and honestly, he's going to have to be sharp. Utah's transition game is no joke. But here's the thing Caps fans don't want to say out loud. This roster is built to survive injuries, but not to thrive through them. So Carlson staying on after the skate, working with the group, that's encouraging, but until he's back running that first power play unit, the Caps are still uphill. And when Carbery says Utah is, quote, a handful, that's code for be ready or get run out of your own building. So a lot at stake, right? And that is why it is a bit of a head scratcher, why it's not all hands on deck. Really should be at the end of the day. I guess part of the logic would be you don't want these guys gassed for the game, and I understand that logic as well. But at the end of the day, regardless of who showed up or who didn't, we need to see the best performance from our team, the Capitals, tonight. They need this win more than they've needed one in quite some time. All right, so coming up after the break, the Capitals on the trade deadline. Elliotte Friedman weighs in. What are his thoughts on the Caps as we approach close to the Friday's deadline? I'll discuss straight ahead. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listen, my job was a mess before Indeed. Indeed makes the hiring process so easy. Let it make it easy for you as well. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help your job get the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on the Locked On Capitals podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, I want to thank all of you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So segment 2 here, the trade deadline, days away, Friday. Either the Caps are in or they are not. And it's not as, clean cut or an easy decision as many people think, as I've heard from many of you. They're like, forget it, Dan. Forget it. This is not the Capital season. Don't you dare talk about trading one of the future prospects, the future. And I get it. If there's any kind of deal out there that says Hudson is on the move, that Leonard is on the move, these kind of guys, I don't want to hear it. But there are RFAs, there are UFAs. The Capitals still do have options. So let's dive into it here. This is the part that matters the most. The trade deadline is days away, and Elliotte Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast said something that should define this entire conversation. He said, quote, if the Capitals add, I think the preference is to add someone they could keep for a while. I can't imagine they're too big in the rental game, unquote. Again, Chris Patrick has said as much. He has also said that even if something is perceived as a rental, right, that there's only this year left on their contract, that they would consider an extension. I think if they make a move, think something similar to what we saw a few years ago already. Time flies with Rasmus Sandin, right? A player that is going to help the Capitals for years. And I think that's huge because that tells us Chris Patrick isn't thinking short-term Band-Aid. And I don't think that's the right position. He's thinking sustainability. And why wouldn't he? The Caps have roughly $15 million in deadline space per Puckpedia. They project to have over $36 million this summer and even more in future seasons. This isn't a cap-strapped team. This is a team deciding what it wants to be in the post-Ovechkin era. And here's where it gets spicy. Names floated: Elias Pettersson, Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou. Those kind of moves, those wouldn't be tinkering. That is franchise level retooling, but, the cost, massive. The Blues reportedly wanted a haul similar to what Vancouver got for Quinn Hughes. 3 former first rounders and another first. That's not cheap. That's your prospect pipeline. So here's the opinion part. Yeah, I'm leaning into it. If you believe this team is just one legitimate top 6 play driver away from stabilizing the offense, you do it. Because standing still in the Eastern Conference, that's death by 1,000 paper cuts. You're not good enough to coast in. You're not bad enough to tank. The middle ground, the mushy middle. It's the worst place to live. Friedman's report tells me this front office knows that. They're not chasing rentals. They're not flipping late picks for expiring depth. They're evaluating who can make scoring easier for years. And if that means moving a young NHL roster player plus picks, that's where it gets uncomfortable for me, but necessary, with a caveat. Because right now, this team is asking too much of Ovechkin, too much of Thompson, too much of a defense that already loses its engine when Carlson sits. You either commit to this competitive window or you quietly pivot. Again, underline, boldface type, spotlights on full blast. This could be Alex Ovechkin's final season. It's his final season under contract anyway. Are we going to let the GOAT, the great 8, sail off into the sunset in a whimper, or at least pushing your chips in for your best effort to make the playoffs? I mean, that's the thing, and I think to the people that are resigned to the fact they're not taking that seriously, this could be Ovi's final ride. And to all the people that are thinking maybe he's going to sign a 1, 2, 3 year extension with the Capitals, is he going to want to do that if this team is not invested in success? Those are all storylines. Of course, I'll keep you guys covered all afternoon if a trade pops up featuring the Caps. And of course, there will be a full-length episode after tonight's game. But thank you once again for joining me on this afternoon edition. Of course, if you want your questions, email them to me, minutecastmedia@gmail.com. In the subject line, just put Caps questions. And I'll have one of those, your questions, rather, on an upcoming afternoon edition of Locked On Capitals. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.